kings stand. See.
2 weeks ago, we watched someone step out of the shadows and speak the truth boldly when he watched Jesus die. It was a centurion who said, along with some others, surely this one, Jesus was the Son of God. But there's another right about now who will also step out of the shadows and do a great kindness for Jesus. And Matthew introduces us to him right now. So starting in chapter 27, verse 57. As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. And he rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. So here's this rich man named Joseph who lives not far from Jerusalem. Mark calls him a prominent member of the council. Luke describes him as a good and upright man who had not consented to their decision and action. And both of them speak of him as waiting for the kingdom to come. And John tells us he's the disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jewish leaders. Makes you wonder where he's been, right? Did he ever speak up when the council met and started talking about their plans to kill Jesus? Or did they shut him down, tell him to shut up? Or did he just stay silent because he was afraid? Was he even in there in those meetings? Did he get the word when they finally got Jesus among them so they could finally kill him? Where has he been? We don't know, but he steps into the light, exposing his faith for a moment. He loses some fear and takes on some courage. He goes before Pilate and asks the question. Maybe you might say a little too little, a little too late, but don't you appreciate his faith even in this moment? He does what others do not do, a small faith that pushes him to some kindness. Jesus is dead, his body is there, and he wants to honor Jesus, so he takes custody of the body. He does what others didn't do, maybe what they couldn't do, maybe his position and wealth, his place in the cabinet gave him that privilege, I don't know. But with gumption, he goes to Pilate, asks for the body, and Pilate agrees so he can do what is proper and right and respectful for the body. He gives Jesus an honorable burial. He wraps the abused and mangled body in some linen, and he lays it in a brand new tomb cut out of the rock. And I'm guessing right about now he's hurrying because he's right up against the Sabbath and probably does this because he has to do it right now. He's in a short while unable to do it as everybody needs to be home for Sabbath. And since he hurries and finishes what he can, he really didn't finish it. And that's why Luke says the ladies went home to prepare spices and perfumes to anoint the body later, to take care of the body. But right now it's good enough. Sabbath is about to begin. No work should happen. And so he is done. I guess we conclude that Joseph, if he hadn't done this, we might assume that body of Jesus might have been up on the cross, just stayed there on that middle cross like the Romans let it happen. Maybe eventually when they decided to take it down, it would have ended up in a dump or an unmarked grave. But that's not what was prophesied. That wasn't the plan of God. And that's not what happened. Joseph steps up to do a great deed, asks for permission, takes care of the body. But don't you wonder how he got the body? How he got it off of the cross? Maybe you've seen it depicted in movies or plays, in a picture or a painting. Have you ever lifted a body like of a child that's sleeping, how heavy it is? You ever picked up an adult who is unconscious? Bodies can be heavy. A dead body, dead weight, is a chore to move. How did he get it off the cross? Did he use a rope or a ladder? Did he get some help? How did he deal with the nails? I'm guessing all of Jesus' blood would have been all over him as he tried to get him down and wrap him up. What a mess it must have been to clean up the body. I'm guessing he cleaned it up. Took a little time to get the caked on blood and dirt off before he wrapped him up. I don't know how long it took, but finally the body's ready and the tomb is ready, so he puts it in his own tomb. Finally, Jesus is at peace. The large stone is rolled in front of the entrance and everybody goes home. It was a nice final resting place for Jesus. I don't know what it cost Joseph. I don't know if it cost him anything, at least some time and some energy, maybe his reputation. He gave him a perfect spot. Nobody had ever laid in this tomb. It was brand new. His own body, Joseph's, would be there someday, but the master needed it for now. Joseph probably didn't know how long, but Jesus wouldn't need it for very long. But there it is. The work's done. And did you know there's somebody watching? Joseph wasn't the only one there. Nicodemus, it looks like, is there too. But there are others of the feminine persuasion who are there watching. Verse 61, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there opposite the tomb. Mary, the part of the larger group of ladies Matthew had already appealed to, talked to, mentioned. He names these two who had been with Jesus before, and here they are watching what happens. They watch Jesus' body, I think, come off the cross. They watch him tenderly wrapped up and placed in that open tomb. And that is not a small point. That details matters, and Matthew points it out. Pay attention to it. They watched the body of Jesus go into the tomb, Joseph's tomb. They know the body and they know the tomb. They know the stone that was rolled right into that place so nobody could go in. They know exactly where they are and where this is and where Jesus' body is entombed. The reason that is important is because later when some folks want to throw stones at those ladies, not literally, but their story will be attacked because they believe those ladies must just be grief-stricken and heart-sick and easily confused. When they go back on that Sunday morning to take care of the body, to finish what Joseph started, maybe they got the wrong body at the wrong tomb in the wrong place. Maybe they go back there and they're mistaken as they show up at an open tomb where no body lays. Maybe they don't know, but they're wrong. Matthew's right. They are there watching. They know. In just a few days, they're going to come back, and they're not going to be confused, not by where it is, but by what happened to the body. They're not hysterical. They're not wrong. It's a fact. That is Jesus in that tomb with that stone rolled in front. And that is important. Do you think somewhere later on some folks will accuse them, the other apostles, of some misinformation, spreading some fake news, telling stories and lies? Absolutely they will. And it won't take long for the news media to start spinning the tale, and the rumor on the street will be what they fear is going to happen. And if you don't know the rest of this, listen up. Friday turns to Saturday, verse 62. The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. Sir, they said, we remember that while he, Jesus, was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I will rise again. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. And this last deception will be worse than the first. It's Saturday morning. The Jewish leaders are at it again. They haven't stopped pestering Pilate. They have their way. They did their thing. They killed the king. And now that he's dead, they haven't stopped worrying. Now they're concerned that his disciples, his followers, Jesus freaks, will come back, steal the body, and now that the ringleader is dead and buried, they'll take him away and say, he's risen from the grave. So they asked Pilate to make it secure, and he does. Take a guard, Pilate answered. Go. Make the tomb as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. Now, this is interesting to me that the Jewish leaders feared what would not happen, a hoax. The disciples don't fear Jesus' rising. They don't even believe it. The fearful leaders who hated Jesus remember better than Jesus' followers who loved him what he said and what he thought he might do. The disciples aren't thinking about stealing the body. They've given up on the dream. Apparently, the kingdom is gone. The Lord is dead. The story is over. Period. There's no resurrection that's coming. Why would they fake it? They don't even believe it. But the leaders want to make sure that that cannot happen. Not so much a resurrection, they don't believe that, but a hoax. So they want to put a stop to it before it even happens. They think they can stop men from coming into that tomb, and they will. But if they think they can keep God from doing what He has promised, they can't. And more than not even helping their cause, they are even making the case worse for themselves. They are helping the disciples and all of us make the case for faith. Card says, by making sure there was no chance of a ruse by the followers of Jesus, they actually provided one of the best pieces of evidence we have that it all happened just as Jesus said it would. Now, we stop right here in the text at the end of the chapter, and I think the reaction of Christians is, please don't stop there. We like to jump ahead very quickly now to chapter 28, verse 1. You know what happens next? You can read ahead, but I'm not going to read it. All of us who know the story are anxious to get to that part and leave the difficult part behind. We've watched through Matthew's pen Jesus dying in a gruesome way. We watched His body now come down off the cross and go into the tomb. We watch now the stone rolled in front of the tomb. Spoiler alert, what happens next is crazy, but true. But don't go there yet. Be patient. Follow this through. Put yourself in the place of those ladies and those men. See what it would be like on Friday night and Saturday morning and all through the day when it would just be hard to bear. We fly over the verse. We jump right to chapter 28 and celebrate chapter 28. But think for a moment what it would be like to be those folks who love Jesus, who just put Him there, and who now cannot get out of their minds His bloody face and His stiff body. Do you know how they felt? You wonder what the shock was like? Is there any hope at all? Doris Sanford wrote this about her experience with death. She wrote, "The two policemen wouldn't leave until I headed for the phone to call my next-door neighbor. My voice was strong and robot-like. 'Janet, please come. They won't let me leave until you get here. Al is dead.' My husband had gone mountain climbing for a weekend, favorite energy releaser after a sedentary week at the university where he was a professor. The policeman said he fell about 2 o'clock p.m., died immediately. They didn't know any other details. Our children, Christy, age 3, Tim, newborn son, were tucked in but not yet asleep. Janet came over, hugged me, and the police left, and I explained the little I knew. We both stood in the kitchen numb with disbelief. She asked if I'd be okay until morning. Yes, of course, I said. Nothing I had heard in the last half hour seemed real. It was like watching a movie. Of course I would be okay. After Janet left, I went to Chrissy's room, patted her until she flopped on her tummy and went to sleep. Back in the kitchen, I said half out loud, "What do I do? I've never done this before. Oh, God, help." The next days came and went. I would still set a table for him without thinking, watch the clock for the time he would come home. And several times I wanted to tell him something before I realized he wouldn't be there. It was real, but unreal. The reality of Al's death began to soak in when I saw the body in the casket. I needed physical proof, and I was a tower of strength that the funeral people said, stoic and under control, and everyone applauded how well I was doing, but in reality, I was like a zombie. My state of numbness protected me from going crazy. It was hard to sleep, and when I did sleep, sleep was filled with violent nightmares. I was exhausted, confused, overwhelmed, rattled, and weak. I put the toaster in the refrigerator. I couldn't make decisions. I longed for somebody to take over. I remember feeling offended that life was going on in such a casual way for everybody else. How could they go to work when Al was dead? How could they mow their lawn? How could they play tennis? Al was dead. It's a shock, isn't it, when death visits us? When somebody dies that we love, our world is rocked and everything goes upside down, and most of us know the feeling, and some in this church are living it right now. How does the world keep going when somebody you love is dead? And think how bad it is when you say, and the one who is dead is Jesus. Jesus, the giver of life, is dead. It's normal what these folks are doing in Matthew's gospel and the others. because they don't expect to see Jesus alive again. They buried him. That's why they got him ready and put him in the tomb. It's over. What happens next will catch them by surprise. Even the believers, especially the believers, did not see what's coming next. They're giving up and closing shop and preparing to be done with Jesus. He's gone. Resurrection, it looks like, is the furthest thing from their mind. That would be impossible. How would they consider providing a hoax for the people when they don't even believe it could have happened? And more than just being a sad day that somebody we love is gone, it's the Messiah. The Messiah who is going to bring hope. The Messiah who is going to change everything. The Messiah is dead in the grave. Hope is gone. The dream is over. The nightmare has begun. Their hopes are crushed officially. God's Messiah has not come, and nothing will ever change. And talk about a sad day. But we know what happens next, and we can hardly wait to get to chapter 28. Jesus had already told them, starting back in chapter 15, the Son of Man will be delivered into the hands of the chief priests and the elders and the teachers of the law, and he will be killed, and on the third day he'll be raised to life. But they don't know that. Somehow they heard it but weren't listening. Maybe they believed it at the time, but they can't believe it now. Are they holding on to hope or totally devastated, overwhelmed by life and more by death? Just this past week, just this past month, just this past year, some in this church have had this. The feeling. Some of you years ago and still feel it. The sinking feeling, the darkness that comes to stay, the loneliness that will not leave, the hurt, the sting, the pain. Death is devastating. It hurts over and over and over. And you wonder if you can ever heal from this. And sometimes it's not death. For others, what turns your world upside down is more than just death. Disappointment, discouragement, depression, sickness, sadness, sudden scares that take your breath away, corruption, crime, and a questionable future, insecurities and inflations and other incidentals that shake us to the core. And you can be sitting in church on a Sunday morning and it feels like Friday night for these guys. Saturday that will not end. Despair settles in your soul and you're surprised if you think you just might make it one more day. It's not wrong to be there. Maybe you find yourself there. Even right now you're there. It's okay to be there. Don't stay there. Don't fear the night and the next day. What God will do on the next day is going to blow your mind. Don't give up hope. The old prophet said, Habakkuk 1, "For I'm going to do something in your day that you would not believe even if I told you." Hosea 13, "I'll ransom them from the power of the grave. I'll redeem them from death." Makes you wonder if the people who heard that could have believed what was coming. Makes you wonder if even Christians in church believe it still. What will happen in chapter 28 will be incredible. Read the story if you want. Surely you know it, and if you don't, you got to see it. Hang on to see what God is going to do on the morrow. God is about to do a number on death. He'll rock the world and the gates of hell. He'll move very quickly from hopeless to hopeful. So I don't know what you're going through, but don't you dare quit believing. Tony Campolo tells a story from long ago. It's been repeated many times in sermons. Maybe you haven't heard it. It's about his home church in West Philadelphia. This is a white guy in a black church, and he loved that church. He would sometimes get to preach there as a younger man, and even when he did some traveling, he would sometimes be allowed to preach, and he loved it, preaching in the black church because they gave him feedback. He would be preaching, and during the sermon, they would tell him how he's doing. He said, that doesn't happen in white churches very often. One time he was struggling during a sermon. It became obvious. He said, 3/4 in to the sermon, a lady on the back row yells, "Help him, Jesus! Help him, Jesus!" But there are times when he was doing well, and they would say things like, "Preach it, brother, preach it." Some of the ladies, he said, would raise a hand in the air and say, well. Some of the deacons, keep going, brother, keep going. Very rare in white churches, he said. White churches are more likely to look down at their wives and mumble, stop it, please, stop it. There was this one particular time when they all got together and several men preached back to back. It was Good Friday, the Friday before Easter Sunday, and they were celebrating what happened on the cross even before Sunday. And when it was Tony's turn to preach, he put it into gear and got to preaching. The more he got into it, the more they loved it. And the more they shouted, the better he got. And by the end, he said there were cries of joy and shouts of hallelujah. Similar to what happens every Sunday when I preach. When he finished, he sat down next to the black preacher, the real preacher of that church, and he smiled. And that old man put a hand on his knee and said, you did all right. And he said back to him, are you going to be able to top that? And the old preacher smiled and said, son, you just sit back because this old man is going to do you in. And Tony said he did. He got up, and for an hour and a half, he really basically repeated the same line. I mean, he had other things to say, but he kept saying it, and maybe you've heard it. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. And Tony added, if that statement didn't blow you away, you just should have heard him say it. He started out softly, it's Friday. And on Friday, my Jesus is dead on the tree, but that was Friday, and Sunday's coming. And one of the deacons yelled, preach it, brother, and he did. Said a little more with a little more volume, it's Friday. Mary's crying her eyes out. The disciples are running in every direction like sheep without a shepherd, but that was Friday, and Sunday's coming. Women raised their hand in the audience. Well, the men, keep going. And he did. And he kept getting bigger and louder. Well, preacher started saying, it's Friday, and the cynics are looking at the world and saying, as things have been, so they shall be. You can't change anything in this world. You can't change anything. But those cynics didn't know that it was Friday, and Sunday's coming. And he kept going. It's Friday, and on Friday, those forces that oppress the poor and make the poor suffer were in control. But that was Friday, and Sunday's coming. It's Friday, and on Friday, Pilate thought he had washed his hands of all kinds of trouble, and the Pharisees are strutting around laughing and poking each other in the ribs. They thought they were back in charge of things, but they didn't know it was Friday, and Sunday's coming. And he kept going back to the one phrase, and the audience was in step with him, responding with greater enthusiasm every time he said it for an hour and a half. When he was done at the end of the sermon, Tony said he was exhausted. Surely everybody else was. But he said one more time, it's Friday. And with one voice, 500 yelled back in unison, but Sunday's coming. We live in the light of Resurrection Sunday. But even while we know it and live it and read it and believe it, today, even on a Sunday, it may feel like a Friday to you, like Saturday that will not end. Maybe you've been in the place of the apostles, unsure and uncertain, shaken and rattled in life and in spirit, confused. It's what's happening in life, as if God isn't even doing anything. Maybe in this moment you are like the women, heartbroken and sad and discouraged, even depressed maybe, feeling like life is at its lowest and it cannot get any worse. And does anybody even care anymore? Does God care? Even if it feels like Friday or Saturday, Sunday is coming, and Sunday has come, and it has changed every Sunday and every day since. And we celebrate today because even though death continues to rob us blind, Jesus did die, and he was buried, and he raised on the third day, so we have hope. Don't let go of hope. Jesus died, but he is not dead. He is alive, and because of him, who lives, we live, and we live again and always will live, even when we die. He said at the grave of a friend, I am the resurrection and the life. And every time I say that in a funeral, I ask, do you believe it? And will you put your faith in the gospel story, in Jesus, who died on the cross, but lived again, raised from the dead, who said, I am the way and the truth and the life. In faith, you should follow him. In your own watery grave, you should follow him. In his resurrection, coming up and being a new person, you should follow him. You should trust in the Jesus who conquered sin and death and reigns victorious today. Because if you have Jesus, you have hope. And if you are in Christ, you can live in hope. Let's stand and sing this song. Come if you need to.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy.